Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Jean Fourie, and today in our lecture on the development of motor skills, we are looking at fine motor skills. So this is part of Unit 5, and we have previously looked at gross motor skills, and this time we are now looking at the fine motor skills that children need to develop, what they are, and how they develop in childhood, in the early childhood stage. So motor skills, particularly these, when we speak about fine motor skills, these are the small muscles which are in your hands and your wrist and your fingers, and it is the ability to control these muscles. It also includes the muscles of your eyes and your face, and your eyes moving with the tasks that you are doing, that the hands are doing. So we often, when we speak about fine motor control, we're speaking about the control of these parts of the body. So this has all got to do with the functions that we perform every day with our hands, where we're grasping things and fastening clothing and cooking and doing the things of daily living. The fine motor skills develop and they require strength. So the hands must become strengthened, and there needs to be control and dexterity. So one needs to be able to move easily and do the activities required of schooling and of daily living. So fine motor control is the coordination required of the muscles and the skeletal functioning and the neurological functions. So it's our nerves working together with the bones and the ligaments and the muscles and our eyes in order to produce the very fine, small, precise movements that need to be well coordinated and well controlled when we are doing any fine work. So we can think about gross motor control as that control that we need to have over our arms and our legs and our body. It's the large or general motor control that's required. And then the fine control is that ability to move the pencil and to move the pen to produce very small things like letters on a page, or to thread a needle, or to button up a button. All of these things require very fine, precise movements. So fine motor skills are a set of skills that involve the coordination of these small muscles in small movements, and it occurs when as educators, when we think about this, we think mostly in terms of hands and fingers and eyes being coordinated together. And another term that we often use is manual dexterity. This refers to the ability to move the hands. Both hands working together or one hand at a time, and it is the coordination required to move the wrists and the arms and the fingers to manipulate very small objects and to do precise activities. So the refined use of these fine muscles that control the hand, wrist, fingers, thumb, and the eyes all working together is the set of skills that are needed. So we need skills to be able to write, to draw things, to use the tools of everyday life, such as cutting with the scissors, eating with utensils, buttoning up your shirt, doing things like sewing with a fine needle, building puzzles, all the toys that children manipulate and play with all the time are building up these skills called fine motor skills. So what is happening is that the person is developing from infant years, from the time that a baby is born, through their toddler years, early childhood development. They are learning the basics of grasping, manipulating, moving all the objects that children play with and use in everyday living. So preschool children are developing the control of their body and their posture and their hands and fingers in order to become independent, to dress themselves, to hold things, and to do the tasks required with both hands. So these fine motor skills are important. They're important for self-care, the ability to look after oneself, to do the daily tasks independently of dressing and undressing oneself, being able to manipulate the things that are in our lives, like door handles and opening and closing of pots and utensils. So children develop these self-care skills as they are growing, and they are developing with time. So from about the ages 3 to 4 years old, children are learning to dress themselves and undress themselves. They can start using a child's scissors, that is a small scissors designed for their hands to do simple cutting. They can start using a crayon or a pencil to do drawings and to do shapes and things. And eventually they start to learn to, at about the ages of 4, to dress and undress themselves without assistance. They can start eating with a fork. They are gaining more ability, dexterity to cut shapes out with a pair of scissors. So children are constantly growing and refining these fine motor skills. By about the age of 6, they're able to cut soft food with a knife, to tie their own shoelaces, and become pretty independent at all the skills that are needed to dress themselves in their school uniform, because they might start school at the age of 6 and 7 years old. So they need to be fairly independent with the skill of dressing themselves, undressing themselves into school uniforms, packing their bags, turning the pages of a book. All these things need to be in place before a child enters schooling. So because children are developing at their own rates, when we look at any of these timelines, they are often not exact. Some children will develop faster than others, and some will be a bit slower, but there are general guidelines for assisting people to see if a child is developing any major difficulties with their development. So motor development is developing as the child is growing every single day. They get better at these things with practice and with exposure to doing the tasks, with cutting and drawing and dressing. All the fine motor control that is required becomes better. The planning, the executive functioning planning that is required of these tasks also is refined. So children will learn, for instance, cutting and pasting pages and books and turning pages. So the brain and the eyes and the hands are all learning to work together as these sets of fine motor skills are developing. So the hands and the sensation. We've spoken about the sense of touch, the sense of being able to feel with your hands. That is all needs to be in good functioning in order for good fine motor control to work. So children are learning all the skills required of playing games and the drawings, the pre skills that are needed in order to function adequately at school. And as the child's nervous system is maturing and getting more refined, and so the muscles and the body are all developing as well. So it's a maturational process, and it develops as the child is growing and developing their entire body. So fine motor skills, these sets are important throughout not only school, but life in general. And if a child is having difficulty with any of these things, they might be experiencing difficulty with everyday activities of eating, and then the activities of personal care, such as dressing and putting on their socks and their shoes. All these things have an influence on a child's personal lives and their ability to become independent. And then at school, fine motor skills are important in order to learn to write, to use a computer, to read, to turn the pages in a book, to do the cutting and coloring, and all the skills that happen at school. Now, people who have studied formally children, how they develop, and the developmental things that are happening at every single age group, come up with charts like this particular chart, and it gives parents and teachers and medical practitioners and occupational therapists, it gives all the people who deal with children the guidelines, the general guide as to how the child should be developing and whether children are developing quickly enough or appropriately within their general age groups. So this is an example of a developmental chart which goes from birth to 6 years old. So birth starts at the bottom of the chart, and these are the things that the child should be able to do in the first 6 months of them being born. So if we have a look at the fine motor skills that are developing, we see that a child is starting to look at objects, to reach for them, and to put their hand out. So the eyes are seeing and the hand starts to pick up and to grasp for things. So as the child develops, they start picking up objects with thumbs and fingers, moving them from one hand to the next hand, between hands, picking up small objects, and developing that pincer grasp between the thumb and the finger gets more and more strengthened and more refined as the child is growing. And by the age of about a year to 18 months, they're able to hold a crayon and they're able to start scribbling on a page and doing their first marks, which would be unintentional on the page. They can start to build towers and to turn pages in picture books. And by the time they're 2 to 3 years old, the child is cutting with a scissors, and they're drawing shapes and scribbling. The child is about 3 to 4 years old, is drawing circles, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail of their drawings in a minute. They're able to cut with a pair of scissors, and then in the years just before they're entering school, they developed an ability to draw recognizable pictures and to draw a picture of a person that has some parts to the person, and they're able to start printing their own name, even if it's very simplistically. So there's a lot of development that is happening with children before they even get into school. So these are developmental guidelines. They are charts that give us an indication of the activities that a child should be able to do at these levels. So here is a very useful one. This one starts from 3 to 4 years old, and if the child is not able to do some of these items that are listed on the left, then it's an indication that they are having difficulty with developing the fine motor skills that are needed at this age. So for instance, if they're having difficulty building a tower of blocks, copying a circle, manipulating clay materials, inability to use a little child's scissors, then we might say that they are a bit delayed in some of these drawing skills. They might have problems with personal care, such as eating and controlling a pencil, and all these things are activities that are developing, and they might be a bit delayed. So in order to accelerate and to ensure that the child gets more practice at these things, there are all sorts of activities that we can do, and we'll go into those in the next lecture. So children are developing all these things before they even get to us at school. So by the time they're 5 and 6 years old, they're able to cut out shapes, copy complicated drawings, color drawings in, staying within the lines. They're using, we'll talk about pencil grip in a minute. They're able to cut and paste and glue things and do basic drawings. So all of these things require skill sets that are showing that the child's fine motor skills are developing appropriately. So these charts are giving us an indication of what the fine motor development of a child is looking like. So here is an indication of how pencil grip develops with time. Pencil grip, the child is starting from about the age of a year to a year and a half old. They are grabbing a nice thick pencil or crayon in what's called the cylindrical grasp, and they are able to do scribbles on a page. As the child develops, their ability to hold the pencil becomes much more refined. By the age of 2 to 3 years old, they should be having what's called a digital grasp, and the aim is to start developing the ability to hold the pencil with the tips of the fingers and the thumb, the edge of the thumb on the pencil, because that is going to give the most control of the point of the pencil. So there is what's called a modified tripod grasp. Tri meaning 3, which is the final pencil grip that one's looking for. So it's the thumb, the forefinger, and the middle finger, which will be on the tip of the pencil, approximately an inch or so from the end point of the pencil. And the aim is that that becomes the most efficient pencil grip for children to have. So it should be developed by about the age of 5 years, certainly by 7 years old when they're entering school. This is the pencil grip that children should be using because it allows them to do the fine motor control of writing and drawing in the most efficient, effective way. So there are a whole set of examples of different kinds of pencil grips, and I have also put them on Blackboard for you because pencil grip is such an important thing that develops with this idea of fine motor control. Along with holding the pencil correctly and developing the skills of actually controlling the pencil or the pen, the whole idea of drawing, being able to draw on the page, being able to draw representations of the world in 2 dimensions is also a skill that develops as this in this idea of fine motor skill sets. So when children are doing lots of drawing, it's developing their fine motor skills. It's developing their eye and their hand coordination, the coordination between hand and eye. It's also developing their creativity when they're doing free drawings, and it is providing all the foundations required of pre-writing skills. So children, when they are doing drawings on a page, are attending to things, their attention concentration span gets improved because they need to sit and draw something and think about it and think what they are drawing, and it develops a really important thing called our idea of concepts and schema. And so the cognition behind the process of drawing drawings in children is developing their understanding of the world and their understanding of all the objects in the world. So drawing develops through a set of stages, and if you have a child and you ask them to do some drawing, you will see these stages developing as the child is getting exposed to using crayons and pens and pencils on a regular basis. So generally, we refer to the stage from about the age of 2 years old, when the child is able to hold a crayon for the first time and do some scribbling on a page. This is called the scribbling stage. And at this stage, children should be given lots of colors to use, nice thick pencils or thick crayons that are very easy to draw on the page with, lots of paper and lots of opportunity to do scribbling. So the scribbling develops from it's called random marks, just randomly putting things on a page. But with time and allowing the child to do lots of scribbling, their marks become more controlled. So it goes from uncontrolled scribbles to intentional and controlled. So they will intentionally start to make straight lines, to make shapes, and to start developing an idea of the fact that what you're putting on the page is can start to represent things. So the first symbols or shapes that are drawn are generally little circles, straight lines, crosses, and dots. And the important thing about this stage is that the scribbles become more and more controlled as the child is allowed to do more and more drawing. So children should be given a lot of paper and opportunity to do these drawings. As the child develops, they then go through what is called the pre-schematic stage. And this is the stage from about the age of about 4 years old, where children are starting to develop the idea that the random marks on the page represent a thing. So they represent something, a person or their granny or home or things that are in their lives. So it is the development, the cognitive development behind this of developing a schema. So they are starting to develop the concept of things, and that things can be represented on a page. The drawings of people that children are developing at this age tend to have a very distinctive feature, and that is that they will draw a circle which represents the head, or and for them it's the head and body. So the legs and the arms will often come straight out of the head. So this is often in when occupational therapists or people who deal with childhood development speak about this stage, they will often say that the child is drawing a tadpole person, because a tadpole just has a head and a tail with which it swims. So the person is looks like a tadpole. Drawings at this stage are free floating. They do not have a baseline. They're not grounded. They will just be placed anywhere on the page. And so the child will start developing a much more complex schema of how to draw a person. And by the age of about 4, the person will be drawn with a little bit more detail, such as eyes and arms and fingers, and then the trunk of the body will start to be drawn, and the head. They might draw basic things like a sun or a basic shape for a house, and they will start to speak of the scribbles on the page with words. So if you ask them to explain their drawings, they will tell you who they are or what they've drawn, and they started developing that schema, that the drawing means something. So the next stage that develops is the schematic stage of drawing, and this develops from about the age of 5, and it gets refined while the child is going through the foundation phase. So at the schematic stage, the child is drawing a schematic of the things in their lives. So they will draw people with a bit of detail, and so children will be drawn smaller, then mommies and daddies will be drawn a bit bigger. There'll be detail added to drawings like sun and clouds and rain and houses and trees, and they might add animals or things that have relevance in the child's life to the drawings. And generally at this age, the figures will be well grounded, so they will draw them on the ground with grass, and there'll be clear sky and distinction between the grounded figures and where they are placed. So children at this age will also be learning to color in their drawings, and they will start to color as they develop more and more. There'll be more fine motor control, they'll be able to color inside the lines without going out of the lines of the drawing too much. The colors that they use will also start to become more realistically used as they represent the real world. So the sun will be drawn yellow or orange, and the trees will be green. So the schema of the world as they understand it will start to develop, and you can see this in the development of the child's drawings. So as children's drawings are developing and they're developing the fine motor skills required for that, so are the fine motor skills developing of the ability to do writing. And so the handwriting skills, the ability to write all the letters of the particular alphabet that the child is learning in, also matures with time, and this is also one of the sets of fine motor skills that needs to be developed. So we look at how children are holding their pencils and how their fine motor skills are developing. So they are developing more and more. By the time that they get to school, they should be able to do all these pre-writing activities. So these are the kinds of activities needed. One needs to be able to control the pencil from one end of the page to the other end. So these kinds of activities, asking children to copy and follow the lines going up and down, and making the lines more closer together, are pre-writing activities, and writing in circles and around, making children do these kinds of activities often helps to develop the foundational skills required of the writing process that children need to do. So when the fine motor skills of actually doing the handwriting of the letters of the alphabet is being done, there is a lot that has happened before the time developing all the skills of holding pencil correctly, moving the pencil from left to right across the page, being able to control the hardness and the softness with which the child is pressing on the page, holding the page down with the left hand so that it doesn't move if the child is right-handed. If they're left-handed, holding the page in the correct way so that they can write. So all these skills form part of the fine motor control required for writing. And eventually they will start, as they develop through school, start learning how to do printing and eventually cursive writing. And so it gets more refined as the child is moving through school. We can look at a whole variety of different things that give us an indication that the child is having difficulty with handwriting when we look at the actual writing that children have done. So here are some examples of things to look at. For instance, letters that are incorrectly formed. That gives us an indication that they haven't developed the constancy required of understanding, for instance, that the letter S must always be the same direction, and there can be difficulties with adding additional pieces to the writing and making it more complicated, and often these will make the child's handwriting much slower. We can look for poor spacing of the letters and huge spaces between the letters in words. we can also see that there can be difficulties with the spacing between words sometimes with children. And another indication of handwriting problems is the slant of the letters on the page. If the letters are slanting in different directions, it tells us that there's a problem with the development of the handwriting. Letters sizes that are too large for the page or too small for the page also are indicators of handwriting difficulties. And when there are poor line quality, so the child is not able to press at a nice even pressing hardness on the page, they're pressing too softly or too hard, then the writing will be too faint or too thick. So developing that very fine control of the pencil will give all these things need to be in place. So another one is incorrect placement of the letters. So if you look at of, it should be higher up, and there are activities and there are special lined paper that people can use to help children to get the letters placed correctly. So these are some of the indicators that show us that a child has had difficulty with their development of the handwriting skills, and they're indicators of problems with fine motor control. So that gives a very good idea of what all the things are that children are developing when they are developing the prerequisite skills needed in order to do the complex and quick and fast handwriting task required of schooling and tertiary education and things in the general world. So that brings us to the end of this lecture on fine motor skills. And in our next lecture, we're going to have a look at some of the activities that can be done in order to help children with their fine motor control and what we can do to help children in early childhood development, develop the handwriting, the cutting skills, the activities to do daily living tasks easier and to be more functional at school. So thank you very much and goodbye for now.